Well, yesterday I was listening to The Fan, and Joe and Evan were on, and they were talking about a report that had come out. And actually, if you go to ESPN, it was Adam Rubin, I saw, who did the article. Bottom line is, there are some people in the Mets organization who apparently are saying that they're unhappy with Ike Davis because they think he stays out too late partying. And the way Adam Rubin was spinning it, they put this out there to kind of grease the wheels for a possible trade in the offseason. And the point that Joe and Evan made, and I have to agree with it, at this point, the way the Mets are going, they shouldn't need an excuse to have to want to trade anyone. Do I like Ike Davis? Yes. Do I think he could be a cornerstone of the franchise? Yes. But if you can trade him and get 3 or 4 decent prospects for him that have a chance of coming up and producing in a meaningful way, at this point, the Mets need options. They need assets. They have some in the lower levels of the minor league system. You see Harvey coming up. He had his last start last night. He did really good once again. Zach Wheeler is going to wind up coming up next year. They have Familia, can never pronounce his first name, who I've always thought is going to wind up being really good in the bullpen. And they have a few other guys, again, in the lower levels of minor leagues, but they need some better prospects at the AAA and the AA levels, people who can come up within the next year or two and produce. And if you can trade Ike Davis for that, they don't really have a lot of tradable assets at this point. You're not trading Jason Bay. You're not trading Johan Santana. In reality, the only real assets they have that would be of any sort of value to any teams would be a David Wright or an R.A. Dickey or a John Neese or an Ike Davis. And Joe and Evan had actually thought of a really good trade, at least when I thought. I don't know if it would ever happen, but in the Mets' position, they actually have a decent amount of pitching depth in the minor leagues. You look next year, they're going to have a few guys coming off of season-ending surgery. Dylan G will be back. Mike Pelfrey would be back. So the starting pitching is obviously probably the easiest spot to trade from. And the Texas Rangers, right now they have Elvis Andrus starting at shortstop, but they also have a 19-year-old by the name of Jurickson Prokovar, who they think very highly of, is going to wind up being their shortstop of the future. I'm not saying the Rangers would go for it, but the idea of John Neese for Elvis Andrus makes a lot of sense for the Mets on a lot of different levels, and it makes sense for the Rangers, too, who always need pitching.
Well, now, I'm going to, let's be extremely honest here. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been honest with you guys since we started doing the show. My baseball knowledge is extremely limited. So I am going to chime in when I can. But, Eric, I know you know baseball much, much better than I do. So I think you two can have a much better thing with this than I can. And I will chime in if I've got something to say. But I really actually would like you two to almost have your own little back and forth on this one as much as possible. So
I mean, the way I look at that situation of just saying Neese necessarily for Andrews, I don't think that gets it done. Even though the Rangers, you're right, always need starting pitching. I'm not going to argue with you.
Yeah, the Mets would probably have to throw something
with,
else in.
With losing C.J. Wilson last year to Anaheim, they did get the kid Darvish, who's been really good actually. But a lot of times the players that come from overseas, especially the pitchers.
I know he gives up a lot of walks.
Come year 2, I mean, especially like Daisuke Matsuzaka came in for Boston. He was pretty good the first year.
I think that's a good comparison.
He was great the first year with Boston, and then what happened is once people get scouting reports on him, they start seeing him 2, 3, 4, 5 times. It's kind of like all the other pitchers in the league, and their stats are going to drop. Do I expect you, Darvish, to be this good next year? Absolutely not.
And if I could just say one thing to back that up, actually, Darvish kind of has the same tendencies that Matsuzaka does. They both give up a ton of base runners, and you can look in the whip. I don't know his exact whip.
I mean, the only thing that you, Darvish, does really well is he strikes out a lot of batters, too.
Exactly.
He has a lot of put-out material. As far as what I look at with that trade, I think the Mets definitely have to throw more, because I look at it as Elvis Andrus right now, even though they have a kid they're really high on in their farm system, they'll find another place for him, whether it be second base. Well, I mean, even though they got Kinsler there, they'll find a spot somewhere. They'll DH somebody, they'll bring the kid up slowly. I look at it as Andrus got to be one of the top 10, shortstops.
Not even going to deny that, yeah.
So I just don't see the Mets giving up enough to get him, because I think I don't think Nice does it.
Well, it's more the type of trade that they should be doing. I mean, that's the type of trade they should be doing. If they can give from a position of strength and get an asset in a position, I mean, you can always move. I think Tejada would be more easier for the Mets to move to second base than moving Andrews or Prokovar to a different position for the Rangers. They're pretty set in their infield. And if you look, I mean, they do have Adrian Beltre at third base. They have another guy coming up behind him as well, Mike Olt. Another one kind of like Prokovar. He's a little older than Prokovar, but they're as high on him. They look at him as the third baseman of the future, too. They do still have Kinsler, and they do still have Michael Young, who will probably be playing until he's 50.
And Michael Young can play first and third.
He can play everything. Second, and he started
played
as
in the outfield, too, I believe.
Yeah, and he started as a shortstop, if I'm not mistaken. They moved him everywhere. But, I mean, the initial point, and you can respond to this, Mets need assets right now. I mean, everyone wants to point at they're terrible. This is the way the rebuilding process goes, though. At the point that they're at right now, Alderson, he's going to wind up starting making some moves, but they can't spend any money. He's been in a position since he took over, since the Madoff scandal and all that stuff, he couldn't really do much. He had to go for the low-risk, high-reward moves. Some of them have worked out, some of them haven't. If you can trade an Ike Davis, or I wouldn't be opposed to trading R.A. Dickey for the right trade. I don't know if
Dickey's too old to trade, though. That's the thing. A guy's 37 years old.
He's 37 years old, but in knuckleball years, that's 27.
Let me
look at Wakefield.
I do have an opinion on that one. And when it comes down to the Dickey thing, I actually felt like they should have traded Dickey before the trade deadline and capitalized on when he was, he's lost, 2 or 3 of his last starts. So whether you want to say people are figuring him out, the arm's getting tired, whatever it might be, I felt like if they traded him before the All-Star break, they had an opportunity to trade with a contending team that had, good prospects, but weren't worried about them right now, and they were worried about right now.
I agree.
And I thought that would have been the best option for New York to take advantage of. But I think at that point, they felt they still had a chance, that part I had a hard time believing, because I don't know about you, Mike, but as a Mets fan, even when they were playing really good, I didn't ever sit there and say, hey, they could win the division or they could take a wild card. I just, that in a long season like baseball, you're going to get the separation that's meant to happen, and the Mets just do not have the talent to last 162 games. They just don't have it. So that's where, speaking on Dickey, like I said, very limited in my knowledge of baseball, but that's something that I really felt that would have been a smarter move. Maybe not for this year. Yeah, you would have taken even more of a dive than they already did, but I felt in the long run, that would have been a smart move. What's Dickey, 37?
He is 37, but like I said, he did just start learning the knuckleball within the last 3 or 4 years. And if you look at knuckleball's career, they don't exert as much energy throwing the pitch as regular pitchers do. So their careers, in theory, can go on longer. If you look at Tim Wakefield, he was
over 20 years.
Yeah, he wasn't a great pitcher per se. He wasn't like a top 15 pitcher. He was a reliable pitcher, and he was able to fit any need the Red Sox had. They were able to put him in the rotation or put him in the bullpen if they needed to, and he was able to do everything. So that's kind of how I look at Dickey. And like I said, there's a specific market. Not every team is willing to give up prospects for a knuckleballer, but if you can find anybody who's willing to give you a couple solid prospects, or even one. I mean, you look.
I would have packaged Dickey, Nice, and Tejada, and maybe get Andrews back.
See, my feeling on that's not a bad idea. I think they should be trying for multiple pieces, truthfully. And this is one I don't know. Maybe this is probably weak. Nice and Dan Murphy. If they wouldn't go for that, I'd say pass, because it would wind up giving up too much. And if you look at Andrews, yeah, he's good, but he's not a power hitter. He's a speed guy. And are you really telling me that if it's just him and David Wright in the Mets lineup, you really think he's still hitting 280 or 290? I think the bat would wind up suffering, especially you put him in Citi Field, which seems to be where bats go to die in recent years.
Field's too big. That's why. It's just.
Well, they moved the fences in. That was supposed to change that. So
you have to move them in again.
Yeah. That's unbelievable. But I mean, you look at it doesn't always take multiple prospects. If you can get one really good one for someone like Dickey, but I'll go one further here. David Wright, obviously, he's got the player option for next year. They're going to bring him back. I personally think they should re-sign him to at least a 3 or 4 year deal. You want to go longer than that? All right, I'm not opposed to it. I am opposed to them talking about bringing in big name salary without getting David Wright solved. I feel like you have to take care of in-house before you even think about adding major salary outside of house. But if they don't want to re-sign Wright long-term, they cannot go through what they went through with Jose Reyes again. They can't. That last season, before he left, you were 50-50 he was coming back. The Mets, you knew they weren't offering him his big contract. It was all about whether or not Reyes was going to take less money or leave town. He left town. You can't have another season where the big name guy is stuck in limbo, basically. If you're going to bring him back and you're not going to sign him long term, you have to get 3 or 4 prospects out of him without even thinking about it. Can't go through that again. Fan base is already alienated as it is. You can't keep alienating the fan base.
It's the ownership. It's the Wilpons. They don't know what they're doing.
It's the Wilpons, but at this point, you really hope that they have given Alderson some sort of carte blanche. And he's had 2 years to evaluate the organization. He has had 2 years to figure out who everybody is. This has to be the offseason he starts making some moves. I don't think he's going to add big contracts. I don't think he's adding one big name free agent. And I'm fine with that. It's all about the little trades. If you want to look, I'll put it like this. It wasn't one person that made the Mets the mess that they are today. But I think we can all agree Omar Minaya didn't help that mess. If you look at how he did it, he kind of set them up for failure. He was great at bringing in the big name guys, the Pedros, the Carlos Beltrans, the Johan Santanas. He didn't know how to build a farm system very well, even though he did draft Matt Harvey and Ike Davis. I'll give him that. But he never really built the middle of a roster. He built the top guys, and then he'd bring in the lottery ticket guys, the John Maynes, the Jose Valentins, the Fernando Tatises, guys who were low-risk, high-reward players, guys that if you got anything out of it was a bonus, guys who are great if they're your 23rd, 24th, and 25th man on the roster. His problem was they would get off to their hot period. Tatis had his period, Valentin had his period. Then he would make this mistake of thinking, all right, you belong in the B or C tier. That's not how you build a roster. You have to have the top guys, you have to have the lottery ticket guys, but you have to have something in between to bridge the gap, because when the injuries hit, you're done.
All right, well, you know what? I think the Mets, as usual, are going to be a very entertaining thing to talk about, at least for a little bit. I mean, to be honest with you, the Mets are something, in my opinion, that every year you go into the year, say, well, hopefully they're fun to watch, and then by the All-Star break, you're like, well, here we go again. And it is what it is, and I think if they follow through with the rebuilding process, I do agree with Mike. Don't go big splashes and all that. Rebuild the damn team. Mm-hmm. They do not have the money. They don't have the. I don't think they have anything they really need to go sit there and say, well, we go make 1 or 2 big free agent signings and we can go make a push with our division.
The only thing I think that would ever save the Mets is, one, the Wilpons got to sell.
I concur.
The Mets are not going to win with the Wilpons.
Could not agree more.
There's only one person out there I think that could come in as an owner and change things quickly for the Mets.
Magic Johnson? No, I'm sorry.
Mark Cuban?
Mark Cuban.
There you go.
He's been dying for either a baseball team or a football team. The guy's got more money than he knows what to do with, and he wants to spend it. He's dying to spend it. He said he would throw $500 million to set up a playoff in college football, for God's sakes. The guy doesn't care. He just wants somewhere to spend his money. And the Mets need a guy like that. Somebody who can come in and say, listen, I don't care what it costs me. I don't care what I have to do. I want to win. He's a fan-first owner, and I love that.
Yeah, he'll do everything he can to bring guys in to help the organization. I agree with that. That's for sure.
Could not agree more with Mark Cuban. I think he would be a great owner for the Mets. But I think the one problem, and I think
MLB doesn't want him.
well, yeah,
That's
they wouldn't.
That's the biggest problem.
Yeah, no,
they stopped him. He actually was
it was
trying
the
to buy the
Cubs.
Cubs.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't let him. They said that because the MLB owners that are there now don't want an owner like him. They don't want somebody who's going to come in.
They don't want to let
Which
the
is a
new
mistake.
school in.
I think he would be good for baseball. I think he's good for basketball right now. I think he's gotten so much better as an owner over the last decade. He's owned the Mavericks, and I think he would be really good, especially because you really are getting a more mature Mark Cuban now than opposed to when he first took over the Mavericks.
And the Mavericks, the Mavericks have been a team we talk about over the past 7-8 years.
And they weren't before him. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks to Mark Cuban, that's for sure.
My last point is I just don't think the solution with Mets is throwing money at it. I think that's how they got in this mess in the first place. They never wanted to build a farm system, so they threw a lot of money at it, and when the contracts didn't work, everything went south. So as much as, the big name contracts are great and everything, you have to build this farm system. You look at the teams like the Cardinals, even the Yankees. They can go to their farm system when they need to, and they can bring up players who can contribute at the big league level. We have some guys like that in the lower levels. We have some guys who are still developing at the AAA and the AA, but we need more of that. We need a general manager who's going to put that in the organization. So we have a pipeline and not just 1 or 2 years of success. Pipeline so we can have a decade of success for once.